I was born in a room without windows, but I saw the world through iron and fire. Dunfermline, Scotland, 1835. The year doesn't matter as much as what it meant to be born then. My father was a weaver, a good one. His hands moved across the loom like a musician's across strings, creating something from nothing, thread by thread. But a machine was coming, and when the machine arrived, it didn't care how skilled your hands were. I watched my father become obsolete. That's a word people don't understand until they've lived it. Obsolete, not fired, not let go, simply no longer needed. The world had moved on and he was still standing in the place he'd always stood, doing what he'd always done, wondering why no one wanted it anymore. We were starving, not the kind of hunger you feel before lunch, the kind that hollows you out. That makes you understand that the world doesn't owe you anything, that your existence is not guaranteed, that if you want to survive, you must become something the world cannot ignore. My mother took in work, binding shoes. Her fingers bled at night. I would watch her wrap them in cloth and return to the needle the next morning. She never complained, not once, but I learned something watching those bleeding fingers work. I learned that dignity and poverty cannot coexist forever. One or the other must die. We left Scotland when I was 13. America. The word itself was a kind of magic then, but the reality was a textile factory in Allegheny, Pennsylvania, 60 hours a week, $1.20. I was a bobbin boy, changing spools of thread in the dark basement, breathing cotton dust that turned me lungs grey. This is where most stories about poor boys end, or begin and end in the same place. The factory, the mine, the field, working until your body breaks and the world forgets your name. But I made a decision in that basement that would change everything. I decided I would not be replaced by a machine. I would become the man who owned the machines. People misunderstand ambition. They think it's about wanting more. It's not. It's about refusing to accept the position you were born into as the position you will die in. It's about looking at the world as it is and deciding that you will bend it to accommodate your existence rather than bending yourself to fit into its margins. I took a job as a telegraph messenger boy, 12 hours a day, running messages across Pittsburgh. But while I ran, I watched how business worked, how the men with money talked, how deals were made in hallways and offices, how information moved, and how the people who controlled information controlled everything else. I learned Morse code. I learned it so well that I could translate messages by ear, faster than the trained operators. When the telegraph office needed someone who could do this, I was ready. Not because I was lucky, because I'd prepared for an opportunity I didn't know was coming. This is the first principle of wealth. You cannot predict the future, but you can become the person the future needs. At 17, I became a telegraph operator for the Pennsylvania Railroad, and this is where the real education began, not in what I was paid to do, but in what I was positioned to see. I saw how the railroad worked, how capital flowed, how investments were made, how a single decision about a route or a bridge could make or destroy fortunes. The superintendent, Thomas Scott, saw something in me. Perhaps he saw himself. Perhaps he just saw someone willing to work harder than anyone else. He began teaching me, not formally, but by letting me into rooms where decisions were made, by explaining why he made the choices he made, by treating me not as a servant but as a student. When he offered me a chance to invest in the Adams Express Company, I had nothing. But my mother had something. She mortgaged our house, $500, everything we had, bet on a company that carried freight along the railroad lines. People called it reckless. They said a poor boy shouldn't gamble with his mother's house. But I understood something they didn't. Risk is only risk when you don't understand what you're betting on. I knew the railroads. I knew the business. I knew that Adams Express was positioned in the exact place where growth was inevitable. The investment returned dividends almost immediately, then more, then more. This was my first taste of something that would become my religion, capital that works while you sleep. I was promoted, made superintendent of the Pennsylvania Railroad's Pittsburgh Division at 24, the youngest man to ever hold a position. But the salary didn't matter anymore. I had learned the secret that separates the rich from the working class. The rich don't work for money. They make money work for them. I began investing in oil, in iron, in bridges, not randomly, strategically. I looked for the places where America was growing and planted myself there before the growth arrived. I invested in T.T. Woodruff's sleeping car company because I knew business travelers would pay for comfort. I invested in iron because I knew the railroads needed it. I invested in bridge companies because I knew stone bridges were obsolete and iron was the future. Every dollar I made, I reinvested. Most men, when they make their first real money, spend it. They buy the house, the carriage, the clothes. They want the world to see that they've made it. But I understood something deeper. The only way to become rich is to stay hungry after you've eaten. By the time I was 30, I was making more from my investments than my salary. By 35, I was making more than most men would see in a lifetime. And I saw the opportunity that would define everything. Steel. America was built on iron. But iron was weak. It broke. It bent. It couldn't carry the weight of what America wanted to become. Steel was the answer, but it was expensive. Too expensive for most purposes. The Bessemer process changed that. It made steel cheaper, faster, better. But everyone was thinking small. They were thinking about making steel for tools, for rails, for small applications. I was thinking about building a world made of steel. In 1873, I founded my first steel company, not to compete in the existing market, to create a new one. I built the Edgar Thomson Steel Works, designed specifically to mass-produce steel rails for railroads. I didn't enter the market, I became the market. But here's what no one tells you about building an empire. It's not about being smarter than everyone else. It's about being willing to do what everyone else won't. I drove my competitors out of business, not with superior product alone, with superior efficiency. I cut costs everywhere. I negotiated harder. I demanded more from my workers. I paid them well when business was good, but when times were hard, I cut wages. I broke strikes. I hired replacement workers. The Homestead Strike of 1892. They still talk about it. My workers wanted better wages, better conditions. I was in Scotland. My partner, Henry Clay Frick, brought in Pinkerton Guards. Violence erupted. People died. I could tell you I didn't know that I was across the ocean, that Frick acted without my approval. But that would be a lie. I knew what kind of man Frick was. I knew what he would do. I put him in charge because I knew he would do what I couldn't be seen doing. This is the dark truth about building something great. Someone always pays a cost. I became the richest man in the world. Carnegie Steel produced more steel than all of Great Britain. My company was worth hundreds of millions. I had more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes, and I was miserable. not because of the money, because of what the money revealed about me. I had become the thing I hated. I had become the man who ground other men into dust to build his empire. I had become the machine that made my father obsolete. I sold Carnegie Steel to J.P. Morgan in 1901 for $480 million, the equivalent of hundreds of billions today. When Morgan shook my hand, he said, "Congratulations, Mr. Carnegie. You are now the richest man in the world." I said, "And what do I do with it?" "Here is the rule that made me richer than kings. It's not the rule you think. It's not about leverage. Though I use leverage, is not about efficiency. Though I perfected efficiency, is not about ruthlessness. Though I was ruthless. The rule is this: know the difference between value and price. Price is what you pay. Value is what you get. And the man who can see the gap between the two will never be poor. When I bought iron fields, I didn't buy them because they were cheap. I bought them because I knew steel would require iron, and owning the iron meant controlling the price. When I bought coal mines, I didn't buy them for the coal. I bought them so my competitors would have to buy from me. When I bought railroads, I didn't buy them to run trains. I bought them so my steel would have guaranteed transport. This is vertical integration. This is control. This is understand that in business, the man who owns the supply chain owns the profit margin. But value isn't just economic. I spent the second half of my life giving away everything I made in the first half. People called it guilt. They said I was trying to buy my way into heaven. Maybe they were right, but I prefer to think of it differently. I wrote an essay called The Gospel of Wealth. The premise was simple. The man who dies rich dies disgraced. Wealth is not a prize to be hoarded. It's a responsibility to be managed. The rich man is merely a trustee for the poor, administering his wealth for the good of the community. I built libraries, thousands of them, because I knew that education was the only ladder out of poverty. I funded universities, concert halls, research institutions. I gave away 90 of my fortune before I died. But here's what haunts me. No library I built ever brought back the men who died at Homestead. No university I funded ever gave those workers their wages back. No concert hall ever made their children less hungry. You can't undo the past with the future. You can only try to build something better than what you destroyed. I'm telling you this because you need to understand something about wealth, real wealth, the kind that changes the world. It costs something, not just money, not just time. It costs pieces of your soul. It costs relationships. It costs the version of yourself that could have been content with less. It costs the people around you who get caught in the machinery of your ambition. And here's the question you have to answer before you start building. Is it worth it? I don't know if it was worth it for me. I changed the world. American infrastructure, from bridges to buildings, was built with my steel. The modern city exists because of what I created. The Brooklyn Bridge, the early skyscrapers, the railroads that connected the continent. But I also left bodies in my wake, workers crushed in my mills, families broken by my strikes, communities destroyed when I drove their businesses into bankruptcy. So when people ask me how I became so rich, I tell them the truth. I became rich by understanding that wealth is a game of accumulation and allocation. You accumulate resources, money, knowledge, relationships, assets faster than the world can take them from you, and you allocate them into places where they multiply. But I also became rich by being willing to sacrifice things that other men wouldn't sacrifice. Comfort, popularity, peace, conscience. The question isn't whether you can become rich. The question is what you're willing to become in order to be rich. Let me tell you something about steel that applies to life. Steel is iron that's been through fire. It's been heated to the point of breaking and then cooled in precise conditions. Too much heat, it melts. Not enough, it stays weak. The process has to be exact. Building wealth is the same. You have to be willing to be tested, to be heated beyond what feels safe, but you also have to know when to cool, when to consolidate, when to stop expanding and start reinforcing. Most men fail not because they don't work hard enough. They fail because they don't know when to stop heating and start cooling. They expand until they break, or they never heat up enough in the first place. I knew when to heat, and I knew when to cool. When I was building, I took every risk. I borrowed against everything. I bet it all, repeatedly. But when I had won, when Carnegie still dominated the market, I didn't keep expanding. I solidified, I consolidated, I turned on opportunities that others would have jumped at because I knew the difference between growth and overextension, and then at the right moment I sold. That's the secret no one wants to hear. Knowing when to walk away is more valuable than knowing when to enter. Most empires crumble because the empire builder doesn't know how to stop building. He becomes addicted to the expansion, to the conquest, to the game itself. He dies still trying to build, and his empire dies with him. I walked away at the top. I sold to Morgan when Carnegie steel was worth the most it would ever be worth, and I spent the rest of my life trying to figure out what the money was for. Because here's what no one tells you about becoming the richest man in the world. It doesn't feel like winning. It feels like responsibility, like burden, like every dollar in your account is a question you haven't answered yet. What is this for? Who does this serve? What does this build? I used to think money was freedom, and it is, in a sense. It frees you from the fear of poverty, from the need to ask permission, from the constraints that bind ordinary men. But it also traps you. It makes you responsible for more than yourself. Every person who works for you depends on your decisions. Every institution you fund depends on your continued support. Every library that bears your name is a promise you made to communities you'll never meet. You can't just have the money, you have to decide what the money means. I decided it meant libraries, education, research, music, the things that elevated people, that gave them tools to elevate themselves. But was that enough? I don't know. What I do know is this. The game of wealth has two phases. The accumulation phase, where you gather, and the deployment phase, where you distribute. Most people only think about accumulation. They think wealth is about having. But that's only half the game. The second half, the harder half, is about using. About taking the pile of resources you've built and directing it towards something that matters. And here's the paradox. You can't know what matters until you've built the pile. But by the time you've built the pile, you've often become the kind of person who only knows how to build piles. The ruthlessness that makes you rich can make you incapable of generosity. The discipline that builds empires can make you rigid. The vision that sees opportunities can make you blind to people. You have to be two different people, the builder and the giver, the warrior and the philosopher, the man who takes and the man who returns. I tried to be both. I don't know if I succeeded. When I look back at my life, I see two men. the young man in the factory basement who refused to accept his fate, and the old man in his mansion who tried to give away a fortune he'd built by crushing other men's fates. Which one was the real Andrew Carnegie? Both. Neither. The answer doesn't matter. What matters is what you take from the story. If you're young and hungry, take this. The world will not give you what you deserve. It will give you what you take. And if you want to take a lot, you need to become someone who can hold it. Someone who understands value. Someone who can see the future before it arrives and position yourself in its path. If you're successful in building, take this. Efficiency is not cruelty, but cruelty is often efficient. Know the difference. Build something that lasts, but don't destroy everything around it in the process. The empire you leave behind is worthless if the people who built it hate your name. If you're wealthy and wondering what it's for, take this. Money is a tool, not a trophy. The question isn't how much you have, it's what you build with it. And not just buildings, not just businesses. What do you build in people? What do you make possible that wasn't possible before? I built libraries because I believed that every person, no matter how poor, deserved access to knowledge. I believed that talent was universal, but opportunity was not, and I believed that the role of the wealthy was to distribute opportunity. But I also built an empire on the backs of men who worked for wages that barely kept them alive. I crushed strikes and broke unions. I prioritized profit over people. These two truths exist simultaneously. I can't erase one with the other. And that's the final lesson I can give you. You will not be purely good or purely bad. You will be both. The question is, which one wins in the end? Which version of yourself leaves the stronger legacy? I want to believe I ended better than I began, that the libraries outweigh the strikes, that the universities redeem the broken bodies, that the music halls justify the ruthless competition. But belief isn't the same as truth. The truth is, I was a complicated man who built a complicated legacy. I made the world more efficient and less kind. I elevated millions through education while grinding thousands through industry. I proved that a poor boy from Scotland could become richer than kings, but I also proved that becoming richer than kings doesn't make you happy. So here's my final rule, the one that took me a lifetime to learn. Success is not measured by what you accumulate. It's measured by what you leave behind when you're gone. And I don't mean money. Money evaporates, fortunes dissolve, empires crumble. I mean the structures that outlast you, the institutions that continue, the ideas that spread, the people you elevated who elevate others. My steel is gone now, rusted or recycled or replaced by better materials. The mills that bore my name are museums or ruins. The fortune I built has been distributed and redivided and spent. But the libraries remain, the universities remain, the ideas remain, and that's what matters. Not that I was the richest man in the world, but that I used that wealth to build ladders for others to climb. I was born in a room without windows, but I saw the world through iron and fire. I bent metal to my will and built an empire from smoke and ambition. I made more money than any man of my era, and I gave it all away because I understood something that most people never learn. You can't take it with you, but you can send it ahead. The only question is, where are you sending it? To museums that remember your name, or to people who never knew you existed but climbed ladders you built? You choose carefully, because in the end, The only thing richer than kings is being remembered as the man who made kings possible.